Thank you to all the members for supporting my channel. Hello there. Genshin Impact is starting to become one of those older games. I might throw some of you off here when I remind you, but Genshin Impact just recently had its 4th year anniversary, and it came out initially in 2020. It debuted not far into the era of lockdown. I remember purposely going out of my way to avoid Zoom classes so I could play Genshin Impact version 1.0. And now I'm a full-ass man who's only a couple months from graduating with a cybersecurity and engineering major. So needless to say, it's been quite a while, and over the past 4 years of Genshin Impact's history, I've played the game almost every single day for it. I've watched as the meta has shaped and changed, and new characters become relevant, and old characters become useless. I mean, kinda. Not really that many characters in the game are useless, but you get what I mean. Power creep is a thing, and I've watched it slowly evolve throughout the course of the game. And throughout Genshin's history, there have been a handful of characters that on debut were so overpowered they ended up shifting the future of the game's meta. I made a very similar video about this recently that'll help you understand the concept, where I talked about how Hyperbloom ended up being so powerful it quote-unquote ruined the state of the meta. And in my opinion, it did, because moving forward from that point when MiHoYo designed new characters and new elements and new supports and new DPSs, they had to make sure that these characters were competing with Hyperbloom teams, which were significantly powerful with very little investment. It's the reason why the start of Inazuma Abysses had around 1.2 million HP, and mid-Sumeru Abysses had almost 4 million HP. All that to say is, when you look back through the game, you'll find a couple characters that on release were so powerful they ended up breaking the meta and shifting how the developers went about making new characters. And to go back to my nostalgic speech, if you haven't been playing Genshin since launch, there's one character that a lot of people might have told you is really powerful that you don't really see people talk about that often. I am, of course, talking about Ganyu, the OG GOAT DPS of Genshin Impact, in more ways than one. When Genshin first came out, we really didn't have a lot of powerful DPS characters. Hell, we didn't have a lot of powerful teams in general. The strongest team in version 1.0 entirely consisted of 4-star characters with some sort of driver, usually Chongyun or Sucrose. This is the team comp you likely know today as National Corps, which has since been invaded by characters like Raiden and Nahida as the drivers. Aside from that, we didn't really have that many amazing DPS teams. As a matter of fact, let me remind you of something. When we first started playing Genshin, unironically, one of the best DPSs you could use was Crescent Pike Zhangling. If you know somebody that has Crescent Pike leveled up on their account, it is highly likely that they used it to either A, build Rosaria, or B, they used it for Zhongli, or maybe even Zhangling DPS core, since it was really good early Genshin days. That's mostly because the main DPS options we had were Diluc and Keqing and Razor, none of which particularly performed well in that specific time. You didn't really want to use Xingqiu on your Diluc team, which means a lot of people ended up using Chongyun, and then the people that used Chongyun also probably didn't want to do that either, since he was the initial national driver. So then people ended up putting Sucrose on their national team, but then Diluc lost one of his better buffers at the time, and you can probably see where this is going. Put simply, there just weren't that many good options, and a lot of you may sit here and tell us like, oh well, you know, we had banners come out in version 1.0 and 1.1 and yada 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 yada, but we really didn't get that many good characters until Ganyu came out. We got Venti, who was really good on initial release, but a lot of people didn't get him because Genshin hadn't popped off yet. It wasn't until Klee's run that a lot of people ended up starting playing the game. And Venti also wasn't that useful when you were fighting boss enemies, which the original Bis had on its hardest stages. Second character to release was Klee, which a lot of people ended up pulling, but Klee had the same issues Diluc had, multiplied by a little bit, because Klee was a lot harder to play, she didn't have that many good free-to-play options at the time, and on top of all of that, she just was really squishy, so it was easy for her to die. And even though defensive archetypes aren't considered to be amazing nowadays, in early Genshin when most people didn't even have level 70 units yet, your HP really did matter, especially when you were climbing through the AR ranks as quickly as people did back then. The next character to be released was everybody's favorite, Tartaglia, who was very good on release. However, he wasn't that useful aside from filling the slot on National that was originally occupied by either Chongyun or Sucrose. Which means we still have the problem we had before where we only really have one good team. But doing this, D-Luke was able to use Chongyun as his alt carry, which really didn't help that much. But hey, you know, he got Chongyun and Sucrose, so we're finally starting to get two full teams that are actually good. After Tartaglia, we got our hands on Zhongli, and while Zhongli may be really good now, I feel like a lot of people forget that on initial release, Zhongli was god-awful, even for the time. I might make a whole video on that in the future, but essentially Zhongli didn't have any of the utility he has now, and he really lacked a lot of things that made a unit worth using, because he didn't have proper sustain, he didn't buff the team, his most used scenario was as a Crescent Pike DPS or a nuker with his ultimate attack. Only the OGs remember the day of 2-piece Archaic Petra, 2-piece Noblesse Oblige. Then there was Albedo, whose his reputation precedes him, to put it mildly. Finally, right then and there, we got our hands on Ganyu, who, as you can probably imagine, at this point in time, was significantly stronger than everything else. Let me put it like this. When Ganyu came out, the highest scaling damage percent character kit in the game was Jean's Dandelion Breeze and Zhongli's Meatball from the Sky. The Dandelion Breeze had a damage multiplier of 764%, while Zhongli's was little shy of 900%. Ganyu, on release, the first major DPS character in the game, had a damage multiplier on her Frostflake arrows of 230% plus 390%. And unlike Jean and Zhongli, this could be fired off rip, no energy recharge, no cooldown, as many times as you wanted. And, at the time, Cryo was one of the best elements in the game. Getting access to crit rate from passives, getting access to the Blizzard Strayer set for more crit, being able to be swirled with characters like Sucrose to shred res, and on top of all of that, this is one of very few times where Freeze was actually meta. Remember how earlier I said Venti was really strong, but one of his biggest problems was that he usually lacked single target damage? Well, you could put these two characters on a team and instantly quell any issue. I feel like a lot of people don't remember this, but OG Morgana was easily the most disgustingly overpowered team in Genshin's history, especially for the era. Don't get me wrong, International and National, they were very strong, but this was an era of tailor-made Spiral Abyss wave-by-wave content, and Ganyu really earned her title of meta-breaking because she further defined the future of Spiral Abyss from multi-wave content to single 3x3 clears because it was necessary to nerf her, and that's because of the Morgana team. Morgana and Venti were the backbone of this era, making it so that when they were put on the same team, Venti could easily group up every enemy, while providing Viridis and Red Shred, and constantly applying Cryo in order to increase the CV values of the team. This meant that while he grouped every enemy up, they were easily able to be hit by debuffs from characters like Mona, who were able to apply a massive damage dealing bonus to the whole team with her Elemental Burst. And, with access to the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayer, you were able to increase your attack by an additional 48% on your main DPS. And because everybody was grouped up together with Venti's Burst, Ganyu's Burst was able to shine. Celestial Shower in and of itself is not very powerful, causing a massive AoE which will occasionally let loose a little blot of cryo that will deal some damage. But here's the thing, it has an AoE on it, and even though its damage percent of 126 is not that great, if you were able to group up every enemy and slowly pelt them all with bullets in an AoE, you're dealing 126 multiplied by however many enemies are present in the area, multiplied by however many ice shards fall from the sky. Once again, more synergy with the main DPS. And then the final slot was just Diona, for double cryo res, for giving you a shield and being a healer, and being a battery for the main DPS. This team was overpowered. Morgana was easily the strongest comp of its era. It was so powerful, and Ganyu was so powerful that there was meta outcry between content creators who were talking about how Ganyu was too far in the direction of power creep, and how she needed to be nerfed. She never received that nerf. There's a few reasons for that, but it mostly would be illegal for them to sell you a character and then retroactively go back and make them weaker. So what are the devs to do? They have a massively overpowered character that easily overshadows everything else in the game. Well, it's simple. Some of you might remember what I said at the beginning of the video where Hyper Bloom was so powerful that they ended up having to buff the modifiers of future characters to make sure they can compete. You also might remember where I said earlier in the video that a lot of 1.0 characters just weren't that good. I mean, yeah, Klee is strong, but she's not that much stronger than D-Luke. rogue. Yeah, Albedo is a really good off-field applicator, but he's not amazing by any means. Zhongli was just straight up bad at this time, and the only real usable one I can remember was Tartaglia, and he was only starting to become good because people were able to put enough investment in 4 characters to run them in the Abyss. So what are the devs to do? I know. Release the Zhao. Release the Hu Tao. The modifiers on these characters were, quite frankly, ridiculous. There's a reason why on their initial release, Ganyu, Zhao, and Hu Tao had the title of the Liwa Big 3. They far and away dwarf the modifiers of most other characters in the game just by proxy of having higher damage, better teams, and quite simply, they were just being power crap. Even though by modern standard a lot of these characters aren't talked about that much anymore, I still think all of them are fairly decently powerful and can easily 36 star the Abyss. So whenever you use any of these characters, just sit down, take a second, and remember that these are some units that on the initial release, when the Spiral Abyss had less than a fraction of the health it has now, they were almost as strong as they were all the way back then. And we have Ganyu to thank for that. But that's not even all she did, because she also changed Abyss setups as a whole. Like I said near the beginning of this video, a Spiral Abyss used to be a wave clear content difficulty where you would get multiple waves of multiple enemies, and a lot of you know, especially recently, that most times when we have to deal with a lot of enemies, it's usually around 3 at a time and no more than that, or 2 really big enemies or a boss. This trend was set not very long after Morgana became as overwhelmingly dominant in the meta as it was, and it resulted in other side grades of Ganyu teams like Melt Ganyu, which don't get me wrong, they were good, but they don't hold a candle to how powerful Morgana was in the OG game. But who knows, maybe I'm just old and I don't know what I'm talking about. That all being said, like, comment, subscribe. See ya.